There aren't really that many video game studios that would upset me if they closed their doors in 2024. There's a handful, like From Software, Larian, I might shed a tear or two if they were gone, but most of them, if they shut down, I'd be kind of thinking you probably deserve it, like the Redfall studio. That's gone, and everyone's like, whatever, this should have happened months and months ago. Forgetting just bad quality games being delivered, you've got plenty of studios that are focused much more on pushing propaganda, spreading messages, instead of just focusing on making quality entertainment. But there has been some recent news that I do feel is genuinely upsetting. It got me feeling a little bit nostalgic. Feels like the end of an era, and that is that Embracer Group have closed down Piranha Bytes, the creators of the Gothic series, Risen, and more recently, the Elix games as well. They've got a long history, released their first RPG, Gothic 1, in 2001, over 20 years in the industry. It's kind of sad. This didn't come out of nowhere either. Back in, I think, January, maybe late December, there was some rumors, some murmurings that maybe they were done. Their main guy, their studio veteran, who was the team lead, I guess, Bjorn, I think his name is, he'd actually left, and the studio was supposedly on life support. They were trying to find maybe a buyout, see what they could do, but otherwise they were pretty much done. And I kind of got my hopes up. People thought, oh, maybe something will happen, but it felt a bit like copium, really. The end was probably coming. Now it's official. Piranha Bytes is gone as a studio. It's not totally all bad news. Apparently, a couple of veterans from Piranha Bytes, they've actually announced a brand new studio, and we'll talk about that in a second, but I just want to, first of all, you may have noticed that occasionally I might pick on certain games, whether it's an Avowed or a Dragon Age the Veilguard. I might suggest that they aren't looking too promising. They're not necessarily going to be very good. But I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to shill here for the Gothic series. Because if I say that, say, Avowed isn't going to be very good, a game like Gothic is what I'm comparing it to. I think that Gothic 1, Gothic 2, they may be the pinnacle of the genre. Some of the best RPGs, maybe the best of all time, alongside Morrowind, a lot of other games from that era as well. But just for people who may not have played them, or you might want a refresher on Piranha Bytes, all of that sort of history, Gothic 1 was Piranha Bytes' first ever game, and it came out in 2001, which is before Morrowind. It's an open-world RPG pre-Morrowind. So back then, there wasn't really a lot like this. And I mentioned nostalgia, yeah, I mean, I think back to memories of this game, but I didn't really play it until 10 years ago. So it's not like I've got rose-tinted glasses on. I played it when I was a kid. I can't get enough. I played it when I was an adult, and I still felt the genius of this game, along with its sequel, Gothic 2. So many amazing things. And when you think about when it came out, there was just nothing like it. Even the Elder Scrolls hadn't reached this point yet, given it was before Morrowind. Now, if you haven't really heard of Gothic, one of the reasons is it wasn't that huge in the West. It was really the Elder Scrolls that was the big Western RPG series. Gothic was much bigger in Europe, and they competed in Europe for which one was maybe better. I think Gothic may actually have been a bit more popular back in those days, obviously before Skyrim and so on, but Gothic was pretty successful in Europe, and there are a number of reasons why. There's things that these games did that even to this day, I don't think are really matched. The first one, the biggest one, the reason I love these games immediately, kept thinking about them all the time, want to replay them, some of my favorites. The biggest reason is the open world structure. Now, go back 10, 15 years ago, I'm someone who was playing some Ubisoft games, I played the Skyrims, a lot of open world titles in a period where they were oversaturated. Every game was an open world, still kind of happens, but not as much. 15 years ago, everything seemed to be an open world. The problem that I started to have, that many people I'm sure feel these days, is just that repetitiveness. You feel like you're on a treadmill where you're just opening the map up, collecting things around the map. And what I found is most open world games, they don't really use the whole world. The world itself feels more like an art asset with just random activities scattered around the map. And you just use the world as more of a hub to reach those activities or pick up the odd item. The world itself, it doesn't feel real at all. It's like a huge art asset, essentially, and that is really about it. But when I played Gothic, I realized what was actually possible. Gothic uses almost every inch of the world. Everywhere you go, every nook and cranny kind of feels like content. And the reason for that, a huge reason that very few games will do, is it doesn't have respawning enemies. So if you're playing an RPG and you kill an enemy, you tend to get XP. That's how it works in Gothic. So if you imagine this, if you go around this world, each time you kill an enemy, it gives you XP and it doesn't respawn. What that actually does is it gives you this huge incentive to kill every enemy on the map in a way that doesn't feel repetitive. Because you know you're making progress with your character every time you kill something. And you could say, I could do that in any open world game, Elden Ring and Elder Scrolls. I could just go around the map killing enemies. Who cares really if they're respawning? The reason it works, the reason it's so interesting is because of finite XP. When you kill an enemy, that's the only time that you can kill that enemy. And that 25 XP or something that you get, it's limited. You can't just grind forever aimlessly on mobs, because when you kill them, they're gone forever. And what that does, it incentivizes you to actually explore every inch of the map. That feels meaningful, because you know, when you complete this area of the map, I'm kind of done here. I've killed the mobs, they're not returning, I'm done, I can move on to the next section. And that doesn't really happen in most other open world games where the enemies keep respawning. Even Elden Ring or something, I think the open world's pretty solid. But it does, again, just kind of feel like a hub world for you to go to dungeons and travel from point A to point B. It doesn't really feel like there's purpose to explore every single nook and cranny. I'm not just talking about looking for dungeons, but like every little speck of the map. You don't really need to do that in Elden Ring. Breath of the Wild is the same. You have that moon that respawns everything. Nintendo did try and kind of tackle that with weapon durability. I don't think it worked that well though, because what ended up happening is you don't get XP for killing enemies, and your weapons break if you hit too many enemies with your sword or whatever. So what that actually means is you start to realize, well, I might just avoid all fights then. There's no reward for killing enemies. It's like, if I kill it, my sword breaks and I have to pick up another one. So what's the point? This is an endless loop with no upside. I'm not getting stronger. The rewards in the game, they don't come from killing enemies. They come from the shrines. So when I played Breath of the Wild, it was like, yeah, I could kill the enemies, but this feels pointless. So I'm just going to avoid all fights and just find the content, the shrines, dungeons, and move on. So I didn't really enjoy Breath of the Wild that much, compared to Gothic, where I feel like every action I take is meaningful. Every single enemy I kill, it's meaningful. They don't come back. The XP is limited. The exploration of the map is also fantastic. There's little items and little secrets hidden around, because I wouldn't say it's a hard game mechanically like Dark Souls, but it's hard in the sense that you will get hurt, you will die a lot, the combat is kind of interesting, and for that reason, you really do have to loot everything, because you're gonna need healing items, you're gonna need gold, you're gonna have to find gold, things to sell, to fund things like maps. You don't just get a mini-map from the very start, you have to buy it. And you don't have, say, like in Skyrim, where you just have quest trackers and things. You have to read your journal, that old school influence, like in Classic WoW, I've mentioned Morrowind. You do actually have to think. It feels like you're in the world, and I replayed it earlier this year. It's just a lot of fun, and there's no other open world game like it. It doesn't matter what comparison you give me, whether it's Ubisoft ones, Elden Ring, Breath of the Wild, whatever. Nothing is like Gothic. I think it's the best style of open world. It is different. Maybe it's not for everyone. I don't want to totally oversell it. This happens sometimes where you get someone who recommends like a 30-year-old game and they tell you it's absolutely perfect, don't miss out. And then you play it and you're sort of let down because it was maybe hyped up a little bit too much. I want to set some expectations. It's still a early 3D game. And if you remember the early 2000s, there was a lot of junk around that time. Everything was super clunky, early 3D. The developers are learning how to do this in 3D environments and so on. It has a fair bit of jank. It's kind of slow, cumbersome to control and stuff. But if you just think about the open world design, some of those factions that you can join, quest design, some pretty cool choices you can make, especially early on in the game, it is great, and I haven't even mentioned Gothic 2. Gothic 2 is like the first Gothic game, dialed up to 11. It just does everything better. essentially. It's bigger, but not in like a bloated way. It still keeps the core the same. Everything's still super interesting to explore. There's way more content, and it's more meaningful for longer. Gothic 1 loses a bit of steam around the halfway mark. It starts to get a bit linear, uses a bit less of the open world. Gothic 2 just feels good for almost the entire game. So if you haven't played these titles, Gothic 1, Gothic 2, you're disappointed in some of modern gaming, these are the titles for you. They are incredible. If you do love them, what actually happened is Piranha Bytes followed those two games up with Gothic 3. And that's kind of where the wheels were falling off a bit, and it's probably why, after all this time, they eventually have been closed down, because they were just never a consistent developer. After the first two Gothics, they made quite a weird game in Gothic 3. I've never played it all the way through, but it kind of throws out a lot of what are the strengths of the first two Gothic games. It's no longer a tight open world experience where it all feels meaningful. It's like they were trying to copy maybe the Elder Scrolls style and just make it way too big to the point. All the quests, they're like MMO fetch quests. That's what I found a lot of. Just, it loses a lot of that magic that the originals had. They did try and get it back with the Risen series. The first Risen, I'd say that's their third best game after Gothic 1 and Gothic 2. Risen 1, it feels like it's back to basics. It's not ambitious, it's more of the same of the first couple of Gothic games, but it does try to do what worked well for Piranha Bytes. I think it's a very solid game. After that, things are a bit more sketchy. Risen 2 and 3, apparently there was publisher interference and they weren't able to make the game they really wanted to. Is that true? I'm not sure, or if maybe the development team changed and they lost a lot of good people. Risen 2 and 3, best not really talked about, they're just not very good. You do get Ilex, which I thought, and this was me just full on copium, I think, I thought it was going to be the start of getting back to that magic. That Piranha Bytes were back, they were going to be a big RPG player, they were going to start to compete, maybe even in the mainstream. They were going to show that this open world standard of just these bland, large open worlds for the sake of it, for marketing reasons, where the world itself, it's really just art assets planted to look all nice, look all beautiful, but really the gameplay is just boring. You're just on a treadmill following map markers around. I'm talking the modern sort of Ubisoft style. Ilex, Piranha Bytes were going to show that there was much more, that you could have substance in an open world. That's what I thought Ilex was going to be the start of. Unfortunately, they slipped again with Ilex 2. It did come out at the same time as Elden Ring, which I actually forgot about. I remember I bought Ilex 2 and I bought Elden Ring all around the same time. They came out within a week of each other. Obviously, I wasn't going to put down Elden Ring. It was fantastic. I was playing it through. I couldn't stop. And I thought, I'll come back to Ilex 2 later. But then I just heard Ilex 2 sucks. It's way worse than Ilex 1. It's not a good game. It feels almost just lazy, like they were rehashing stuff. There's none of the Gothic magic, that's for sure. And when I heard that, I literally never fired up Ilex 2. I own it. I never played it. I can say I did my part. I tried to support Piranha Bytes, but at the end of the day, they were just too inconsistent. They made too many bad games in a row or in amongst each other, and that's the end of them now. I know they were owned by Embracer, who was shutting down literally everything, sometimes deserved, sometimes maybe not, but I can't objectively really blame them for shutting down Piranha Bytes, because it was always just one step forward, 2 steps back, it felt like. But it is sad, because the memories of these Gothic games, they were still kind of using the same engine, even for Ilex. You had that Gothic DNA still there, so there was something takes you back down memory lane when you fire up one of those Ilex games. So it is sad. Will we get anything like a Gothic game again? I don't really know. I mentioned that there was maybe some positive news, and that is that a couple of the seniors at Piranha Bytes, who had been there for a long, long time, one of them is Bjorn Pankratz, his name is, he was there, I believe, for Gothic 2. So he was there during the prime days when things were going really, really well. He started a new studio here with his wife, Pithead Studio it's called. It seems to be just them though. It's not like they've hired a huge team and they're getting to work on a spiritual successor to Gothic. They've basically made a video to say, we've got the new studio now, we're going to start working on a new game. It's going to be a role-playing game, but that's about it. I mean, we're probably not going to see anything for years, and I highly doubt that they're going to be able to produce anything on their own that kind of matches Gothic in scale. Now that's kind of ironic because that was part of the reason that Piranha Bytes are now gone, is because they kept trying to make their games too big. They kept widening that scale, which I think was just playing against their strengths. Gothic 1 and 2 were great because they were more condensed. They were more focused on what they were trying to do. Open worlds where every nook and cranny actually mattered. It all had quite a bit of purpose. So maybe this could be a good thing that they're forced to go a bit smaller now and they can actually just make something that has a bit more focus. Whether that's possible with just a couple of people, we'll see. I mean, the amount of these indie devs with like a tiny team, they make a Kickstarter, you get all excited, everyone's talking about it because of a screenshot or maybe one or two videos that are more of a what if, not really representative of an actual game existing. So I've seen that a lot, and for that reason, I don't tend to get excited about a new indie studio announcement. It's a wait and see for me. If they come back to us in a couple of years, they've clearly got something, then I'll get pumped. Then maybe I'd consider contributing to the Kickstarter or whatever. Until then, it's, great to hear, and I'm just going to move on, and maybe someone else can make a spiritual successor to Gothic. Hopefully there are some smaller studios who want to do that. There was actually a mod for Gothic 2. It came out like a year or two ago, Chronicles of Matana or something, I think it was called. It was amazing. It was like an indie RPG, 100 plus hours, exactly like the original Gothic titles. That was great. If someone can do more of that, I'll be very happy. But that's basically it. Piranha Bytes are sadly officially dead and buried. That's not the case for the Gothic series itself though, because interestingly enough, there is actually a Gothic remake. It may be coming out within literally the next 12 months. It's very close. And it's by Embracer Group, who own the rights, and they farmed it out to another studio to make it. So none of the original devs, as far as I know, are involved in making this remake, but it is still coming. Now, there was a teaser of this remake a while back. It was crap. It had nothing to do with the original Gothic. It just felt like a generic modern role-playing game using the Gothic name. Fortunately, they seem to take the feedback on board, and now they're just trying to make something that's true to the spirit of the original. I'm hoping it's basically a graphic remake with maybe some modern quality of life, but it keeps the original spirit. The original design template, that's got to be pretty much exact. I think if they try and modernize it, do their own spin, they're just going to ruin it. They're not going to understand what made the original Gothic great. If they think, oh, you just got to make it bigger, more exciting, that'll do it. No, it's got to be dense. It's got to be small, tight controlled. That's how you get the great Gothic RPG style. They have to keep that, or they're just going to run into trouble. Could be interesting. At least Gothic's not completely dead. There's been some Nintendo Switch re-releases. I think I bought one to try and support it. I ended up just replaying it on PC instead. You can't beat PC for these old school style RPGs. I had to go back to PC. But it's going to be interesting to see, does this remake just tarnish the legacy of Gothic even more, or could it be a reasonable effort at a remake that keeps the spirit, brings in maybe a new audience who perhaps realize open worlds can be something more? Because if we think about what was the legacy of Piranha Bytes, in my view, it was a studio that totally understood and made the best open worlds ever. No other RPG, not many other games I can think of, understood what made an open world interesting and exciting to explore. They nailed it. Gothic nailed it, and I can only hope that some developers in the future take influence from it, because if they do, we would be getting some much better games than we're getting at the moment in 2024. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.